Table on ADM and Peace. My name is Rubina Dewan, and I'm the Secretary General of India Center Foundation, and I'm honored to be your MC this evening. As we gathered here today, we are presented with an opportunity to engage in a meaningful and insightful dialogue on a crucial topic that affects us all. Our focus will be on exploring the relationship between alternative development model and peace, and what steps we can take to promote this connection. Throughout the course of this roundtable, we will hear from our esteemed speakers who bring with them a wealth of knowledge and experience on this subject matter. They will share their perspectives, insights, and recommendations for how we can leverage ADM to foster peaceful outcomes in our communities and beyond. We will also have opportunities for questions and discussions, so please feel free to contribute your own thoughts and ideas. As we engage in this discussion, I encourage all of us to keep an open mind and to be respectful of differing viewpoints. We may not always agree on everything, but by approaching this conversation with a spirit of openness and a willingness to learn from one another, I am confident that we can generate valuable ideas and insights. With that said, I would like to extend my thanks to our esteemed panelists for joining us today and sharing their expertise. I also want to express my gratitude to all of you, our audience, for your presence here today and your commitment to exploring this important topic. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce our speakers and moderator, and may I invite you all to the stage and take your seats. We have with us the founder chairman of ICF, architect of India-Japan Global Partnership, and visionary behind ADM, Mr. Vivav Kant Upadhyay, who will be moderating our discussions. Please take a seat on the stage. We have the co-president of International Forum for Peace and Understanding and deputy leader of the 5-member Norwegian Nobel Committee, Dr. Asle Toje. We have the co-president of the International Forum for Peace and Understanding and head of politics at No to Nuclear Weapons, Professor Alexander Harang. We have the former ambassador to Germany, Indonesia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, ASEAN, and representative to African Union, Honorable Gurjeet Singh Ji. A distinguished socio-political activist and columnist and former director of operations at the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Sudhindra Kulkarni. Norwegian Member of Parliament and former Deputy Minister of Law and Justice and Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Honorable Himanshu Gulati. So we will begin our program with a welcome note and overview, followed by our speakers' talk, introductions, and a discussion on some of the most pressing issues of our time. We have India's G20 Sherpa and former CEO of Niti Aayog and DMICDC, Mr. Amitav Kant. So as a perpetually busy man, and of course we all know Mr. Kant, I believe we have just a little bit of his time. So I'd like to invite Mr. Amitav Kant to come and speak a few words, please.
Mr. Vaibhav Upadhyay, all the distinguished guests on the dais, I'm truly delighted to be here. We are hosting the G20 at a very turbulent time. There's a lot of upheaval in the world because the post-COVID era has seen about 200 million people go below the poverty line. Almost 100 million people have lost their job. We're seeing 1/3 of the world under recession. We're seeing 75 countries of the world facing a global debt crisis. We are seeing a war in Europe going on for over a year, and with huge implication on food, fuel, and fertilizer. And simultaneously, we are seeing the challenge of financial crisis brewing with the closing down of bank in United States. So there are several crises, one after another. And in addition to all this crisis, there's an existential crisis of climate action, climate finance. In my view, every crisis is an opportunity, and therefore, in our view, this is a unique opportunity for India to demonstrate both its ability to undertake a year-long program of this nature, to also be ambitious, action-oriented, decisive, as the Prime Minister has said, and to deliver a very different G20 presidency for the world. Our priorities are about bringing in inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth, ensuring that we accelerate the pace of sustainable development goal as we are midway through the SDG goal of 2030. Instead of progressing, we have regressed. That we push for greater lifestyle for sustainability, the LIFE program of the Prime Minister, as well as push for climate action and climate finance for the developing world. But we also push for digital transformation, and we push for greater financial and digital inclusion of the world. And lastly, we also push for women-led development. And you will have peace and harmony in the world only when there is, to my mind, there is inclusiveness, there's greater sustainability, and there is equity in growth for everyone. And therefore, India very greatly values the voice of the South and speaks for all developing countries of the world, because COVID in one part of the world has implication in other parts of the world, and poverty in one part of the world has severe implication in other parts of the world. And you cannot have peace without equitable growth and inclusiveness, and particularly financial inclusion and digital inclusion in today's world. And lastly, you will not have peace and serenity and harmony in the world without a sustainable existence. If the earth may survive, but we'll all be extinct if we are not able to maintain 1.5 degrees centigrade. And therefore, it's totally incumbent upon all of us to think with a greater vision, to work with the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and work with the philosophy of one earth, one family, one future. Because we may have different geographical boundaries, we may have different political ideologies, we may have different perspectives, but at the end we are all part of one cosmos. We all come from one cosmic web. And therefore we need to ensure that there's peace, harmony, and serenity all over. And with these few words, I'll conclude. Thank you for inviting me. I'm truly grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was obviously Mr. Amitav Kant. He's a distinguished public servant and an expert in economic and industrial policy with his extensive experience in senior positions within the Indian government, including as Secretary of the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion and CEO of Niti Aayog. Mr. Kant has played a key role in driving initiatives such as Make in India and Startup India. He is also serving as the India's G20 Sherpa, contributing to the country's international economic agenda. So we would now like to move on with the program with a welcome note. Later in the evening, we will also have two additional talks. Mr. Nitin Mittal, Chairman and MD of Kenest, will speak. And also, Mr. Mahesh Shukla, CEO and founder of PayMe, will discuss the role of financial institutions. Then we will end today's program with question and answer session, followed by a media interaction and dinner. Now, moving on, we have the honor of hearing from Mr. Vivav Kant Upadhyay. He's a development leader who has made significant contributions to the partnership between India and Japan. As the architect of the alternative development model, Mr. Upadhyay strongly believes that the current development model needs a foundational change and has dedicated his life to turning his beliefs into visible and tangible results. His focus on inclusivity, accessibility, and contributory development has resulted in thousands of projects, creating opportunities, employment, and vibrant economies. Without further ado, I invite Mr. Vivav Kant Upadhyay up here to share his insights and experiences on ADM and peace. Let us all give him a warm welcome.
Namaste. My warm welcome to all the distinguished guests and my fellow speakers and the panel. This idea of alternative development model and peace was tossing around for very long, and finally we were able to put to a shape. I would like to give you a background, how did this thought process of alternative development model came, and that how we are basically working on this and how we are making impact. So in 96, when I was a student, I finished my college and my PhD program in University of Tokyo, and started thinking how we can bring India and Japan together to work something which is the future. Okay. So in that process, it was asked by the people who were contributing and collectively working with us from the Japanese leadership. They asked, what is that India and Japan can do together? What is that different? And we thought about it. We thought, and many friends in India and Japan contributed to this thought process, and we came up to an answer. We said, problem of the world today, we believe, actually is integrated into the development model. The development model which we see today is slightly changed, but basic architecture is the one which was designed few hundred years back. The thought process was very simple: exploit and grow. Create wealth using exploitation. And that's what is today, after 400 years, maybe more or maybe less. We stand in a world where development is synonym to a world of problem. Either it is a chaos, or it is somehow not welcomed by one part of society, or some problem. So it has become a zero-sum game. So if you see a seesaw, you will see there is a growth and there is an environment or society. So if you grow, environment goes down, and if you don't grow, and if you put environment up, growth goes down. That's the old model's thought process. But that's exactly what we said is not correct, And then we proposed this to our Japanese friends, and we came up with an idea that the way France and Germany came together in Europe, and they created a development framework, and then they came with an idea of how we can propose this to other countries in the region of Europe, and European countries liked it. They got integrated to that development framework. I will not go into the details of what France and Germany proposed, but it was still a elevated, or you can say a better version of the old model. It was still not what we were thinking of proposing. So the same idea, we thought that if India and Japan can lead a development model which is based upon empowerment, not on exploitation, because exploitation world has seen for 400 years, but there has to be someone standing to the world and say, enough of exploitation, we only work for empowerment, and if it is not empowerment, then we are not interested into development. And this was very theoretically exciting thing, but for 26 years we worked on this. Our foundation has dedicated a lot of resources, time, brain time, manpower, and a lot of resources in terms of research, And we came to a model which was acceptable to our Japanese friends also. And without naming it as an alternative development model, we basically propose it in the terms of India-Japan Global Partnership. And that's what you see today. Our great prime ministers, starting from Prime Minister Bajpayee, who blessed this entire thought process. And I have a friend, Sudhinji, who was witness to what was done at the time of, he was his officer at that time, and he witnessed where we started and where we stand today. So India-Japan Global Partnership was not about a trade. It was not about that what Japan will sell to India and what India will sell to Japan. If you see carefully where Japan started, because we treated India as a socio-economic lab. We said what, with the new model we can create in India, it can be basically duplicated or replicated in fact in Africa, in GCC, ASEAN and other parts of the world. Why not Latin America also later, if it is working for a social model? So this is how it all started in Japan. And one by one, the first initiative was catalyzed as Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. And that's what our dear friend Amitabh Kanji headed as the first CEO of that initiative between India and Japan. And the idea was to basically create a alternative to SEZs. Then came the idea of bullet train, but it's not bullet train, it's a high-speed railway. The idea was to create an alternative to aviation. Tell me one thing, do we have any stakes in aviation? Zero. Planes are not ours. We don't have any stake in infrastructure, machinery. Everything is like a borrowed thing. Very small part of that has been made in India, and only thing we own is today debt on the balance sheet of companies who dared to create this aviation infrastructure. Nothing belonged to us. And I think the expert Ranaji sitting here, he will agree to this, that aviation, I'm not saying is wrong. Aviation should be made very strong, but we basically deserve an alternative to aviation, which is on terms of India, and we can design our own mobility. Similarly, there are many other things which can be created on alternative. We can have, even the governance model needs alternative today, Even the governance model needs alternative today, but that's a very big subject to be talked about. I think people in this country will pick up it one day. Somebody will take a responsibility of coming up with it. Our responsibility was just to define this process and how we take it to people. So instead of a net, zero-sum game where somebody has to lose to gain, somebody to gain, we want to create a socio-economic framework in the country, India. India deserves its own development framework. As you know that in 1947, when we got, freedom, or you can say transfer of power happened, I still believe we don't have freedom, because until unless we are out of the clutches of, the old thought process of development, we don't have freedom, We don't have freedom. So today, if we have to have a freedom, we must have our own operating system, which can define how 1.3, 4, 5, whatever it is, billion of people, 1.5 billion people, 1.4 billion people can be empowered, how they can participate in something called socio-economic framework of this country. Today, are we? No. Whatever effort we are doing, including mine, yours, Prime Minister's, is very good efforts, but they are all patchwork of the old development model. Or the plug-in. Standalone, you cannot run. So thought process on development model has to be changed. And the point that whether this development model is connected to peace, of course it is connected to peace. If we change a zero-sum game to a net new because you don't have to lose to somebody to win. We can design it in a way that everyone is a winner. And win does not mean economics only. Somebody is happy, somebody is economically happy, somebody is otherwise happy. There are possibilities, and there are. So we keep on doing experiments. We keep on doing initiatives. The next initiative we are very keen in to do is an agriculture corridor from Punjab to Dhanakuni, for which the train has already been made. The goods train has already been made, fast trains. Similarly, it's very similar to what has been done between Delhi and Mumbai, but the software, because in terms of Delhi and Mumbai, it was manufacturing, which was basically the industry. But from the states which go along the Gangetic belt, they don't need manufacturing. In fact, it will be disaster for the country if states like Bihar and UP start manufacturing. What they need is what they have. They have to strengthen their manpower, their education, their tourism, and their agriculture. That's what they should promote as an industry which is available there. And that's what we need. But in parallel, we're also doing some experiments in Africa. The African 17 countries have welcomed this idea of creating a agriculture corridor from, say, Kenya to South Africa. And this is called African Agriculture Corridor. And the theme which has been explained to them is, listen, exploitation you have seen for hundreds of years. Can we work on empowerment-based model? And every country I went, they tried to explain how much gold they have. I said, that's your problem. You have gold, that is why you're exploited. So can we work on a green gold, which is agriculture? And 17 of them have written with us a basic understanding on how a infrastructure which is dedicated to agriculture can be created on these lines. And outcome of that, our research says, can basically take care of entire world's food problem. The design can also make sure there is it cannot be guaranteed zero, but close to zero wastage of food. And it can be basically processed in a way that a lot of people can be taken care of. So coming back to the point of our development model, I will, because the people on this discussion table, I will like them to basically come up with not only question with their views, also later when the time comes for that. My question, which I want to leave with you, is do you agree that India needs a new development model? Second question is, if that is true, if India needs, then do you think to propose a new development model for India, a country like this, is this the right time or not? In fact, I am going to write to the Prime Minister, in fact written once, that G20 is the right platform where India should stand and say, I want to tell the world how the people who were exploited for 100 years are 78% of the world. Countries which were exploited and never been allowed to go to a level of development are consisting of 78% of the world. So 78% needs a leadership today, and India, I think, is a country which can stand up and say, and I think if such a change, I'm not saying you name it alternative, but what I am saying is let's rethink about the zero-sum game on development. Let's think about how everyone can win. And I'm also not opposed to any kind of capitalism, but the right use of capitalism, right definition of capitalism in the local context. How India, because the context of India is different from context of Africa, it is different from the context of Europe, But what has been made outside of India is used in India as per the rules of other land is ironic. And we have been doing this for 70 years, 75 years, 100 years, 200 years. Means I don't want to go in a deep because it will create a different kind of a debate. But tell me, third question, tell me one system except corruption. One system in our country which is ours, you can say this is mine. Tell me one system and I will be ready to debate on that, We have nothing. Everything we are today running, including our parliament, is not ours. So thank you, Modi ji, to create a new building of the parliament. Hopefully with that new building, there's new system put in there. The software should be new. The building is new, but let's put a new software, new structure that fits to the psyche of Indians and needs of the Indian population. With this, thank you very much for patient listening, and I'm open to the questions later when the question answer session comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Upadhyay. That's actually quite a lot to mull over, and we're looking forward to a fantastic discussion later on. Now, it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Asle Toje, Director of the International Forum for Peace and Understanding and Deputy Leader of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. Dr. Toje's extensive experience and knowledge in the field of peace and understanding makes him a valuable addition to our roundtable discussion on ADM and peace. As a renowned scholar and author, Dr. Toje has contributed greatly to contemporary scholarship on the causes of peace. His expertise and insights on the past, present, and future role of the Nobel Prize in empowering processes of peace and development will undoubtedly provide valuable perspective to our discussions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Asle Toje to the stage with a warm round of applause.
Namaste. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for welcoming me to India. And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your introductory remarks. Vibhav, you are my close friend. And I have to say that a lot of people live their entire lives without having one single good idea. And you have several good ideas before breakfast every day. It's a pleasure listening to you. A long, long time ago, I was a young man. And I traveled to India. It changed my life forever. One evening I was riding my motorcycle, an Enfield Bullet 350, up in the mountains around Shimla, and I was looking for Shimla. I don't know if you've been in the area, but it gets rather dark at night, and I got lost, really badly lost. I stopped, and finally they found somebody who could speak English. It was a teacher, and I said, "Please, sir, can you point me in the direction of Shimla?" And he said, "Oh, are you going to Shimla?" Well, if you're going to Shimla, I really wouldn't start from here. And this is sort of the problem with peace. It's never really a good time to start. It always seems inopportune. And Mr. Kant, in his presentation, he outlined the challenges facing us as humanity. We're amidst a huge economic crisis, an environmental crisis, and war has returned. The most destructive wars, the wars amongst the great powers, is now a prospect, a possibility. And this is the time to speak about peace and the value of peace. It's not always fashionable, but it's always right. Let me see. I was supposed to have a PowerPoint presentation here. I don't need it. I'm going to talk a little bit about Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel wrote his testament in 1895. 2 years before, he was writing letters with his good friend Bertha von Suttner. She was a peace activist. In the letter, he is talking about this prize, and he's wondering about, he had amassed one of the great fortunes of the day, and he was discussing how many years should I plan for that this prize should be awarded. And he writes to Bertha von Suttner that if we have not achieved peace in 30 years, humanity will be reduced to a state of barbarism. And he was not entirely wrong. In the 2 world wars that we fought in the 1900s were increasingly destructive and ended up with the advent of nuclear weapons. The first weapon that, in the prophetic words, "I am become death," the destroyer of worlds. Now we're in a position where great powers are threatening each other with annihilation. And I would like to remind you or point you towards a group of physicists who were having lunch in Los Alamos. Enrico Fermi, the Italian genius, posed a question. The question was, where is everyone? He was talking, of course, about the high likelihood of civilizations outside our planet. There are tens of thousands of planets where there should be life. And the question is, why do we lack conclusive evidence that we are not alone in the universe? And the most depressing answer from the physicists were civilizations destroy themselves before they're able to reach out to other civilizations. It is our shared goal and our shared obligation not to fall into that trap that we destroy civilization. And all of the challenges that Mr. Kant was outlining are indeed true. But war, cataclysmic war, nuclear war, is the greatest danger. And even if Alfred Nobel did not see the advent of nuclear weapons, he was a very bright man. And in his letter you can already see that he sees that weaponry are becoming incredibly and increasingly destructive, and that we need to find a way to break the cycles of violence. Being a member of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, it's usually said that it's a great honor. I can assure you that it's a very hard job. It's a tough job. It's difficult. We get a lot of very good nominations every year, and it's difficult to find the right one. And for me, coming here to India is a learning experience. I come to India to learn about the peace traditions of this country, and to learn from the energy that determines a country on the rise. India is on the move. India is a country that is becoming increasingly important in world politics, and it's a country that now must decide what sort of great power does it want to be. Does India want to be a superpower like the United States or China or Russia? Or will India look into its history, into its own doctrines, and draw from the lessons of your religion, of your culture, and give a great gift to the world? A peaceful great power, an essentially peaceful great power. This is my hope. This is what I hope to hear. I also hope to learn very much from you here in the audience. I very much look forward to the questions and answers. I will endeavor to answer straightforwardly as much as I can any questions you have about the Nobel Peace Prize or about the cause of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tohe. Now, dear distinguished guests, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our next esteemed speaker, Professor Alexander Harang. Professor Harang is a renowned figure in the field of peace and understanding, having served as the president of the International Forum for Peace and Understanding, head of politics at No to Nuclear Weapons, and director of the Norwegian Peace Council, among other distinguished positions. Professor Harang's extensive experience and insights into peace building and conflict resolution have been widely recognized, and we are honored to have him share his knowledge with us. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Alexander Harang.
So, thank you so much. Let's see what we can do here. Can we get a slide up and running, you think? Yep, thank you. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about that organization you got up there, International Peace and Understanding. So Dr. Toje, who just spoke, he's a co-founder of this organization, and I'm also the co-founder of this organization, International Peace and Understanding. So why was it that Dr. Toje and I came up with that idea? Well, we were living a year and a week back from now, and we had the Ukraine war just starting. There we go. And we asked ourselves a very, very simple question. What can we do to avoid nuclear war? What can we do? And that's how we came together. And answering that question came very intuitively to both Dr. Toye and I. No first use of nuclear weapons. If nobody starts the nuclear war, that could be an interesting twist. No first use policy, what is that? No first use policy. The threshold for using nuclear weapons is dangerously low. Everybody knows that. What we've gone through over the last year is extraordinary. We've never been in this situation since the height of the Cold War. What is happening is an overheated system. We have, of course, a massive geopolitical shift that in itself creates a very dangerous situation. We desperately need to cool the system down. Less space for nuclear weapons in security policies and cooling down the system. And of course, there's 2 countries already having a no first use policy of their nuclear weapons in place. That is China, of course, and it's India. Our message to India, and actually also China at this point, is that you are sitting on prime real estate right now. You're sitting on something incredibly valuable. This is the way out. The key to credible minimum deterrence, as your doctrine is, retaliation only, as we say in India. The key to this is no first use. And the threats that we've seen from Russia, and may I also say Russia's adversaries over the last year, the increasing threats of use of nuclear weapons. If we ask ourselves, now that we're in March 2023, why was it only threats, not use, this far? The main driver, the main explanation for this lies in India and China. India and China have proven most effective for Russian nuclear restraint in Ukraine. Just look at the last meeting in the Shanghai Security Corporation meeting in November. These are the policies and the posters that really changes the dynamics and increases the threshold for actual use in Ukraine today. China at the UNGA, at the UN First Committee in New York back in November, they laid forward a suggestion. They proposed a treaty, an international treaty for no first use, so that all the 9 countries that are nuclear armed at this point can come on board and be part of an international treaty, not only a national policy declaration, as no first use is in the cases of China and India today. So there is a possibility, a possible path out there that I want you guys to remember as we go further. And I also want you to remember India's efforts in this field over a long time. Think about the nuclear danger resolution that has been tabled at the UN ever since 1998. That specifically deals with the problem of accidental nuclear war. What can we do to increase strategic response time? What can we do to make our posters safer to avoid a nuclear war by accident? That is very tightly knit, it's very tightly connected to the situation we're confronting today with possible use of nuclear or battlefield nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Okay, so the new start. The situation now, everybody knows that we're in deep waters when it comes to the new start. Russia has suspended its participation. They did that back last month on the 25th of February. I want you to remember that they're not withdrawn. They haven't withdrawn from the START regime. This is much more about the Ukraine war than it is about nuclear weapons. It is much more about having a bargaining chip in the Ukraine war than it has to do with strategic understanding of nuclear weapons. So we have something to build upon. But I would just like to remind you, look back on 2022. And you will see that the world is now NFU, no first use ready. Why can I say that? Look at this. No first use in a draft NPT, that's the Non-Proliferation Treaty document for the first time in history. So we've had the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as you know, since 1970. So it's been around for more than 50 years. We've had so many review conferences. We have had so many occasions where all the countries parties to this treaty has come together and created tons of paper. But the first paper that actually shows consensus on no first use was produced last year in August. Here's the text. The nuclear weapon states and their allies agree to take steps to reduce and eliminate the role of nuclear weapons in national and collective security doctrines. For nuclear weapon states, this should include the adoption of no first use or sole purpose doctrines. So this is from a draft report that was accepted on the 12th of August 2022. Due to the Ukraine war and the conflict surrounding that, we ended up without an outcome document from this conference on the 26th of August, a few days later. But still, this is the first time in NPT history where all states have actually been, have shown that it's possible to agree upon this principle. I know because I was there. First week of this NPT review conference in New York, you saw a tremendous shift. And it's all going back to the Ukraine war and the understanding that we're now living in extremely dangerous times. It's simply too dangerous not to do anything. We have to reconsider all propositions, such as no first use, and you can see a tremendous shift among more than 180 governments in just a week, in the first week of August. That momentum is still there. I just want to remind you about that. So, today's possibilities, I'll be quick. Of course, we're talking about the G20 and we're in India. I would just like to remind you that the Bali G20 statement from November last year indicates a breakthrough in consolidating a general practice against nuclear weapons use and elevating this to a norm now accepted, at least on paper, by the nuclear weapon states. That means the 6 nuclear weapon states, of course, that are part of the G20. This is the text, point 4, from Bali outcome document. The threat of use or use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. Inadmissible. That's a very, 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 very strong word. Never been used like this before. We never had that wording in a G20 setting before. Again, it tells you something about the momentum. The world understands that we need to get something done. And what has the most immediate effect on cooling down the system? That is no first use. No first use policy. The big question, G20 in September, when we're coming, I mean, here in India, it's always G20 now this year, of course. But, you know, when we're looking at the end game here, how is it that we're going to follow up the Bali? That's something to have in mind. And of course, we have to remember what's happening in between. We have a G7 meeting in Japan, in Hiroshima, the home city of the Prime Minister. This is very interesting stuff that's going to happen in May. Hopefully, we're going to see a momentum created in G7 as well on this issue. And I really hope India is ready to take the challenge and bring this further to the big events in September. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harang. I would like to introduce Mr. Sudhindra Kulkarni, a distinguished socio-political activist and columnist. He has an illustrious career that includes serving as an OSD to the former Indian Prime Minister, Honorable Atal Bihari Vajpayee, during his time with the Bharatiya Janata Party. Mr. Kulkarni was also instrumental in the party's India Shining campaign. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
my very dear friend Vibhavji, Dr. Tohe, Professor Harang, co-speakers, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I begin by congratulating very warmly Vibhav Upadhyay. He's not a career diplomat, but he's a people's diplomat. What he has achieved, especially in promoting India-Japan relations, cooperation, would truly be the envy of many in the diplomatic community. In doing this, he faced many odds, took many risks, but he did it all for the good of India. Now he is working on a larger global canvas, along with global partners, some of whom are here. And today's conference is a good example of this partnership. My very best wishes to Vibhavji and all of you. Before I proceed, friends, today is a sad day for people who believe in peace between India and neighbors. We lost a distinguished, eminent journalist this morning, Dr. Ved Pratap Vaidik. There are not many people who have served the cause of peace, friendship between India and neighbors, especially India and Pakistan, with as much passion, zeal as Dr. Vaidik ji did. So, my respectful homage to him today. Friends, the world has entered a period of turmoil, turbulence, and extreme uncertainty. The old world order is crumbling, but the new one is not yet born. The domination of the West is clearly on the decline. The West is declining, the rest is rising, and within the rest, it is Asia that is rising. But unfortunately, Asia is not united. And that's why Asia's voice, in spite of the fact that our economic strength is increasing, our voice in shaping a new world order is not very effective today. Asian solidarity, which was something that we all heard Welcome, Manish ji.
My apologies, the traffic is very bad.
Asian solidarity, a concept that was so vibrant in the 50s, the Bandung Conference, we don't any longer hear of it. After the Second World War, we have had, of course, globally a long period of relative peace at a global level, even though there were several wars, and many of these wars were instigated by the West. Vietnam, Syria, Iraq, Libya. But now that a war has started on European soil between two European states, that the West is really very worried. Of course, all of us should be worried, but somewhere there is a double standard in the Western approach to wars. Had you shown the same sensitivity and resistance to war, when Asians and Africans were suffering, perhaps things would have been somewhat different. Friends, I've been asked to speak about peace within the context of this alternative model of development. All of us know, doesn't need any elaboration, that peace and development are inseparable. So I would like to present 5 ideas for peace, without which an alternative development model is not possible. First, the war that is right now going on, which is now more than 1 year old, the war in Ukraine, must be brought to an end at the earliest. And here, India has a very important role to play. India is the land of Buddha, Mahatma Gandhi, and our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi ji, very rightly said that this is not the era of wars. Now that he is presiding over the G20 summit this year, India must take up this initiative proactively and very strongly. And friends, it's not just political leaders who have to come together. The entire people of the world must come together. And here I feel strongly that religious leaders have a very important role to play. And therefore it's very heartening that His Holiness Pope Francis, amongst all the religious leaders in the world, it is Pope Francis who has been consistently raising his voice for peace, for bringing the war to an end, and not just in Ukraine. When wars were happening in other parts of the world, his voice was equally strong, equally passionate. And therefore, the time has come for political leaders, social leaders, religious leaders to come together. And since we have a representative from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee here, you have an ideal candidate for world peace, for Nobel Peace Prize this year. And let all of us strengthen the hands of our political leaders, religious leaders, cultural leaders to bring this war to an end and ensure that no such wars take place. And this brings me to the next point. The second war, which is very much on the horizon, is the likelihood, the real likelihood of a war in Taiwan. Friends, many of you may not like this, but I very strongly insist that there must be no deviation from one China policy. India follows one China policy. Even the United States of America is committed to one China policy, but it is withdrawing from it. And this is the reason why there is a new situation that has developed. America must commit itself again to one China policy. At the same time, China has a responsibility too. China is becoming prosperous, militarily strong, and as a result, it is creating fear and apprehensions amongst its neighbors. China must assure all its neighbors, including India, that it has no hegemonic ambitions. Third, that India-China problem, India-China dispute must be resolved peacefully. There is absolutely no military solution to the problem that we have with our largest neighbor. Similarly, our other neighbor, Pakistan, there is no military solution. When our Prime Minister says that this is not an era of wars, it applies equally to India-China dispute and India-Pakistan dispute. War is not a solution. So we must therefore strengthen the voice of peace, the voice of reconciliation between India-Pakistan, India-China. My last point is nuclear disarmament, and I'm very happy that Professor Harang very strongly mentioned India's commitment to no first use. Only 2 countries have openly declared no first use, India, China. And it's not accidental, because we are inheritors of great civilizations. So the civilizational wisdom is driving our foreign policy, and it should continue to do so. India and China must show a new model to the world. We must not be competitors. We must not follow and repeat the folly of the Western powers who, because of their competition, precipitated 2 world wars. Are we going to do the same once again? No. Therefore, India and China must set a new example. Nuclear war, Gorbachev very famously said, a nuclear war cannot be won and therefore must never be fought. Which means not just no first use, but irreversible, universal disarmament, elimination of all nuclear weapons. That should be the common demand of the entire international community. Mahatma Gandhi said that nuclear weapons are a sinful use of science and technology. Let's use the enormous power of science and technology for, Vibhavji, what you are calling alternative model of development, free of exploitation and for empowerment of the entire human community around the world. So thank you once again, Vibhavji, for this initiative. And let the voice of peace, of friendship, global solidarity become stronger and stronger, and that's our responsibility. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Jai Jagat.
Thank you so much. Honorable Himanshu Gulati is a young and influential Norwegian Member of Parliament, renowned for his exceptional leadership qualities. Despite his young age, he has held several high-ranking positions, including Deputy Minister of Law and Justice and Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office. In addition, he is the member of the Standing Committee on Justice. His profound knowledge and expertise about Norway have enabled him to foster and elevate the relationship between India and Norway to new heights. Please help me welcome Honorable Himanshu Gulati.
Thank you. Namaskar and good evening, and let me start by thanking India Center Foundation and Vibhav Upadhyay for arranging this important discussion on important subjects in our time. And I'm very honored that my friends from Norway, Dr. Asle Toje and Professor Alexander Harang, who represent international peace and understanding, have come all the way to India to be part of this. And as mentioned, Dr. Toje is also the deputy leader of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. I am very honored and fortunate to be a part of 2 countries. The country I was born in, Norway, whose parliament I have the privilege to be represented in, but also the home country of my parents, India. And I often tell a story from the United Nations a few years back. It's a wandering story, so nobody knows if it's really true, but there is a story that the Premier of Luxembourg once went up to the President of China in the UN, and he put his hands around the President of China and said, Mr. President, isn't it amazing to think that together we represent 1/5 of the world's population? And being from both Norway and India, I sometimes feel the same way. I live in a country of 5.5 million people. That's not even maybe 1/4 of New Delhi, but still superpowers in each of their fields. I'm happy that Norway commands a respect when it comes to peace, international mediation, the legacy of the Nobel Peace Prize, important thoughts and principles that are important for a peaceful world. And we have that respect, not least thanks to the legacy of Alfred Nobel. But India, on the other hand, with the growth it has had on the global stage in the previous years, under the leadership also of the Indian government and the new geopolitical realities, has the force and the command to play an important role when it comes to establishing a peaceful order in the world today. And not just within peace, traditional peace, but also within development, where the India Center Foundation is doing great work with the alternative development model. And these two things go hand in hand. Development and peace are linked together. Without peace, there's no development, and without development, we cannot have peaceful. We cannot have peace. And the clue to it is inclusive growth. And India is the perfect example. We can have the best ideas we want in a small country like Norway, but after all, we're just a few million people. But places like India, where such a big part of humanity lives, is where these ideas can actually have effect. There are so many people in India still living in poverty. We've gotten a lot of people up in the middle class and wealth, but we have many others to lift. That growth is necessary, but it needs to be sustainable and inclusive growth. My last message is by reiterating some of the things that Kulkarni-ji said here. He said that India is the country of Buddha, of Gandhiji, India is also the country of many ancient philosophies on peace and important thoughts and principles on that. And I therefore believe that India has a very important role to play in the future, also in solving the current troubling situations we see across the world. As I think Prime Minister Modi was quoted here earlier as having said that this is not the era of war, which is important of him to say, because this is not the era of war. And India, with its power on the geopolitical front, can and should play a role in solving also the mediating in the conflict that we see between Russia and Ukraine. And I would like to say, since we do have the deputy leader of the Nobel Committee here, that whoever plays a crucial role in mediating a peace between Ukraine and Russia, be it India or whoever else it may be, I think that would be a deserving candidate for the coming Nobel Peace Prizes. So let's see if India fills that role or if it's somebody else. But India does have the power and might and respect and should definitely play a role in solving both this and other conflicts that we see in this world. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Manish Tiwari is a prominent Indian lawyer and politician who represents Anandpur Sahib in the 17th Lok Sabha. Honorable Tiwari served as the Minister of Information and Broadcasting and as a Member of Parliament from Ludhiana from 2009 to 2014. He is widely respected in Indian politics and has made significant contributions to the development of India. Please welcome Honorable Manish Tiwari.
Shri Vaibhav-Kant Upadhyay ji, the chairperson of the India Center and very close friend for many, many years. Shri Sudhin Kulkarni ji, other eminences on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute privilege to be invited by the India Center once again to this dialogue on an alternative development model framework. And I think there cannot be a more germane time to have this discussion when the world seems to be in another flux and is going through an unprecedented period of turmoil. The second decade of the 20th century, 21st century, was inaugurated by the most severe pandemic that we've seen in the past 100 years. There perhaps wasn't a single person on planet Earth who, in one way or the other, was not impacted and affected by COVID-19. It is unfortunate that despite 3 years having elapsed since this calamity befell humanity, we still have a raging debate about the origins of coronavirus. And more than anything else, this points to the dysfunctionality of the current global order and its singular inability to be able to surmount the challenges of our times. If you may recall that it was in the March of 2020, exactly 3 years ago, when COVID-19 started rampaging around the world. It unfortunately took the United Nations Security Council another month to have a discussion on how to surmount or how to combat this pandemic, because unfortunately in the March of 2020, China held the chair of the United Nations Security Council and would not allow a discussion to even take place. It was only when the chair went to the Dominican Republic in the April of 2020 that a discussion or a dialogue on how to combat COVID-19 was even possible. And the one thing that we saw as that pandemic panned out, that all responses were not transnational. They were not even national. They were actually very subnational and local responses. I represent a constituency which has 1,500 villages. It's an agrarian constituency populated by 4 million people. And I can tell you, in those months between the May of 2020 and between the March of 2020 and the July of 2020, each of those villages had actually become autonomous republics, which were regulating themselves quite detached from even what the other unit was doing, maybe half a kilometer down the road. So therefore, I think what we fail to really grasp is that there is a fundamental structural change that COVID-19 has brought about in our behavior patterns. And I am not talking about working from home or the manner in which digital technology transformed our workplaces and our living spaces, but more importantly, even in our attitude towards consumption. And therefore, this investment-driven, consumption-led model of growth, which quintessentially represents the Washington Consensus or the new liberal economic order, which decided to hold the field after the collapse of East Europe and the former Soviet Union, that fundamentally got challenged. Not that it wasn't challenged earlier, it got challenged with the economic meltdown of 2008, but at a people's level, it perhaps got singularly challenged because people suddenly realized that you could survive in one shirt. You could maybe eat less and be more healthy. And so therefore, this is the creative power which unfortunately this calamity unleashed, which we have not been able to really harness in order to bring about the structural change which is required. I heard Sudhinji very eloquently making the point which he makes always with regard to nuclear disarmament, with regard to the need for peace both in our neighborhood and around the world. And I cannot agree with those sentiments more. But the fact is, as we speak today, we seem to be actually in more uncharted waters than we possibly were a decade ago. And therefore, it's as if a new Iron Curtain has descended on the world, and a new Cold War seems to have unleashed itself. That is to even say if the old Cold War had ever ended in the first place. And thus, certain givens which were givens in terms of at least the ideological postulates of working towards, let's say, comprehensive nuclear disarmament, or the need to bring people together for peace, especially in the wake of the Second World War, even though the Cold War was raging. Those postulates, those fundamental ideological postulates, also seem to have fallen by the wayside. And therefore, I think it would really require an extra effort in order to re-energize those well springs of humanity from where you can possibly start rebuilding a consensus with regard to certain fundamental norms of how the international community needs to really govern itself. Because the entire rules-based order, or the so-called rules-based order, which was put in place by the victors of the Cold War, that rules-based order itself is now being questioned as to its rules-based for whom, and who are the rule makers and who are the rule takers. Thus, I think this discussion, and especially when you have technology, which both at one level has been a great leveler, because the internet was the most audacious experiment in anarchy, and it has succeeded. It represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before in the history of humankind has so much power resided concurrently on so many fingertips. I mean, there's more data churned out daily than from the beginning of civilization till the turn of the 20th millennium. So the future of the world really lies at the intersection of a virtual civilization which is evolving and a brick and mortar civilization which evolved over so many millennia. And unfortunately, the downsides of this digital revolution seem to be occupying more of our mind space today than possibly the upsides, which had defined the first 2 decades of its evolution. And nothing could be a more eloquent example than the fact that something as beautiful as Facebook, which was actually invented in order to connect people, build communities, has today become a weapon to disseminate hate and fake narratives, and has been weaponized by both state and non-state actors. So, therefore, when Vaibhav approached me with this, or rather commanded me to come here to talk about an alternative developmental model, it kind of really struck me, and I stepped back and took a deep breath and said, hey, what he's saying is actually a bottoms-up reconstruction of the world that we live in, which fundamentally needs to be reconfigured if humanity needs to survive. I mean, who in this day and age could have ever imagined that on the European continent, which had seen the ravages of 2 world wars, there could be a conventional conflict? And it amazes me, I was talking at the Raisina dialogue the other day about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. I mean, why should the Europeans be even looking towards India or China to mediate? There's so much of institutional wisdom on the European continent itself. I mean, there are many empires which have been made and unmade. Spain, Portugal, England, Europe has been the crucible of civilization. And the fact that Europe has to look outside Europe to find a modus vivendi is a telling example of how dysfunctional have we become as a people, as a society, and even as the whole Westphalian model stands. And therefore, before I'm reminded that the time of my rant is over, I would recess my thoughts here. But just to say, I think in its many manifestations and its myriad dimensions, this alternative developmental model from grassroots upwards is something which should preoccupy the mind space of everybody who has a stake in humanity or the survival of humanity. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tiwari. Ambassador Honorable Gurjeet Singh is a veteran Indian diplomat with 37 years of experience as ambassador to several countries. He's written books on India's relationships with Japan, Indonesia, Germany, and Ethiopia. He's known for innovative approaches to diplomacy and is an honorary professor of humanities at IIT Indore. He's working on expanding the social impact investment movement in Africa and trilateral initiatives with Japan for B2B engagement. It is our pleasure and honor to have Ambassador Honorable Gurjeet Singh with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your initiative, and thank you to India Center. Distinguished panelists, all protocol observed. So, it's very clear we have problems on our hand, and we are looking for another way to develop. So in my last book on India and Africa, called The Harambe Factor, I have delineated how in this century, India had a new model of development for Africa, which succeeded. And the model was consultative, the model was people to people, private sector led, based on capacity building and human resource rather than natural resource development. It is because that model succeeded that almost all the G7 countries want to work with India under trilateral partnership in Africa. And my book says that this model that we successfully ran from something like 2003 to 2018 has also now worn away. The world has changed. We need a new model. But we learned from it. And the G7 countries believe that India's model is better accepted in Africa and other developing countries. It is because India has the India-Africa Summit, the India-Caribbean Summit, the India-Central Asia Forum, the India-ASEAN summits, and we work with the Pacific Islands. There's hardly any developing country area where India does not contemporarily deal with. So our foreign policy has a very humane angle to it, which means development cooperation is in our policy. Now, what do we do today with this idea of development cooperation? How do we take it forward? Now, there's a lot of money promised and a lot of conferences fail, like the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. Repeated failures. But this is called faith in humanity. For 70 years, your conferences fail, but you still go back to them thinking, no, one day wisdom will dawn on us. It doesn't come. So are we going to continue to cry over spilt milk? My view is, why are we dependent on our friends in the West, our friends in Asia, to do what we know how to do? So my suggestion has been that we don't need to do a BRI. But everybody knows that the sustainable development goals need to be met. And if you meet them, you will have grassroots development, you will have targeted development and families and communities, you will have democracy in your country because people would have got the basic benefits which the world promised them. Now, how do we get to those SDGs? Because we are not getting them. We can keep changing the name. Millennium Challenge Goals failed. Sustainable Development Goals falling behind. So, I believe that this is the time India, with its experience and its modest budgets, should lead a new fund which should bring in Indonesia, our predecessor G20 chairman, bring in Brazil and South Africa, our successor G20 chairman, all emerging countries, and say, let's set up a new fund which will only do impact investing in the developing countries. Only impact investing. No building bridges, no building airports. Just making sure there is impact. Impact basically means achieving the SDGs. Now, if you do that, the basic issue is you can get funds from Nigeria, Egypt, Singapore, Malaysia. There are many others who are not in G20, but you can bring them in. It is not to say that we will not take Norwegian funds or G7 funds or Chinese funds. But the priority setting will remain with us. It will not be a G7 or China priority setting. Priority setting will be by the developing countries, led by India and its friends, for them. And this is what we aim to achieve. When we talk of achieving the SDGs, one SDG is often forgotten, 8.7, the social protection of children, championed by none other than Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Laureate. Now, this one attracts no money. So, if you cannot protect your children whose welfare has regressed in the pandemic, then I'm afraid your globe is worse off than any nuclear war. You need to protect your children and make sure they get proper nutrition, education, and health. The social protection of children must get more funding. Look at the amount of funding promised to climate change. Forget about delivery. At least promise something to the children of this world. So we need to have a larger SDG funding, which is what I am proposing with the fund, which will then distribute funds to different projects to achieve all the SDGs, not only climate change, which is the darling of the G7. Now, finally, let me come down to the Ukraine crisis, which has wrecked our harmony. In the case of the COVID, we tried to blame somebody, but we didn't quite know how, and we are all impacted. But Ukraine crisis is a man-made disaster. So man and woman must take advantage. And that reminds me, sir, I would suggest in future we don't have manels, but we have a woman on the panel to make sure that the full generosity of the world is reflected on our panels. So men and women equally responsible for this world. Now, the UN has failed. The UN Security Council was meant to maintain peace and security. It can't. So instead of now digging up why, how, this, because the big powers who are supposed to manage the world are unable to manage themselves. So what is required now? Protect the G20. Because that is about the only group, forum, it's not an institution, a forum, where you can achieve something. Now, there are efforts to divide the G20. India is trying to play a role where we are opening space in the G20 between big power rivalry, which is threatening to wreck this forum. But people say that this is an economic forum. I think that's what Mr. Kant was trying to explain, an economic and functional forum. So therefore, we should not be discussing these kind of issues because we have never discussed them before. But when the UN Security Council fails you, you have nowhere else to go but come to the G20 in India and try and say, let me find a way out. I believe that the holy soil of India does find ways out. I know a few days, maybe 10 days ago, there was a Lavrov-Blinken pull-aside meeting. It could happen only here. And then I met the chief negotiator of Ukraine, who was explaining how things went wrong when they were almost right. And I know that he met some Russians in India. So things are happening with the gentle nudge of India. India does not have to be an open arbitrator, open mediator. India only has to provide the ambience in which a better understanding can be reached. And this has to come with a new model of thinking, of developmental thinking of your mind. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to the discussion part of today's evening. Of course, the moderator for tonight's program is Mr. Vibhav Kant Upadhyay. Just to remind our audience, we would be discussing these topics: geopolitics in the 21st century, how shifting power dynamics creates instability and how it can be mitigated, nuclear risk reduction, why we should fear the bomb, and why India's no first use policy is of the utmost importance for multilateral risk reduction, the causes of peace, what can contemporary scholarship teach us about the most precious of commodities, and we can also speak about the Nobel Peace Prize. So may I request the moderator to kindly start with the discussions, please.
Thank you very much. So I would like to make few comments on what Ambassador Singh just talked about. First of all, I would like to say that his point is well taken. And I was also a little worried about no women on the panel. That's not true, actually. We invited 4 of them, and none of them were available for this period. So I decided to make the moderator, the main moderator, as woman, Rubina Dewan. Okay. So she is running the show. So, and I'm really thankful that you pointed out to that. Second point I would like to say, that with due respect, what Ambassador Gurjeet Singh ji just said, the reason why SDG goals are failing on many things to achieve is that because they are the patchwork of the old architecture of development model. Doesn't matter how many times you paint your broken house, it will remain broken, So it's a broken house painted again by good cement or good paint and all that. Architecture needs to be changed. That's what our honorary member of parliament Tiwari ji just mentioned, that world is like upside down. So before I start the moderating, and I'm basically going to moderate it between speakers and distinguished guests sitting on the main table and other guests also. So let's keep a format, Anyone who wants to briefly want to say something or ask something, please state the name, who you are asking the question. And if you have a suggestion, you please point out suggestion is towards what. And please be brief because, nothing should come between dinner and us, we should finish it. And we have 2 very important presentation by Mahesh and Nitin. Both are case studies of alternative development model, which I will like everyone to see that how industry is adopting the alternative development model later. So, why don't I start with someone from the table to ask a question. Okay, Dr. Rana.
Instead of asking a question, I would like to make a few comments. We are discussing of alternate development model and to bring inclusive model. what has gone wrong in our so-called development models. In my opinion, our biggest problem in bringing disparity is primate city syndrome. We have neglected regional development and focused only on main cities. Even our, the cost of living in a metro city keep shooting up, and it becomes beyond the common man. And that is where the disparity starts in. So the first thing we have to do is stop our metro cities and bring regional development. And unless we bring the regional development, the cost of living in the cities cannot be brought down. So that is the first point I would like to say. And that was the concept of which we worked out with President Palam, the Pura concept. Because unless we bring the regional development, the primate city syndrome will continue. That is the first comment I would say. Second, by that way, the cost of health, education, and justice and real estate has skyrocketed. And that has created all the disparities. We cannot bring inclusive development unless we eliminate these parameters. That is, in brief, I have said. Detailed discussion can take place anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rana. Those who don't know that Dr. Rana is very well known as the development man of India. He has headed government agencies which are known for its development leadership. Thank you. Please, can somebody be with Mike and go there? No, the gentleman there. Can you raise your hand, please? Yeah.
I'm Anup Bose. I'm a senior advocate, Supreme Court, and I crave Vaibhavji's leave and indulgence to read a very short paper on my own thoughts on world peace and international understanding. So, the cause of world peace and universal understanding has always been extremely dear to my heart. On 27 September 2019, Modi ji, in a most compelling speech, asserted, "We belong to all places and to everyone. We belong to a country that has given the world not war, but Buddha's message of peace." 125 years ago, the great spiritual Guru Swami Vivekananda gave this message to the world during the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. The message was harmony and peace and not dissension. Today, the message from the world's largest democracy for the international community is still the same: harmony and peace. Our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was a tireless champion of peace. In his famous Stress with Destiny speech, delivered at the stroke of midnight hour on 15 August 1947, Nehru said, "Peace is said to be indivisible. So is freedom. So is prosperity. And also is disaster in the one world that can no longer be split into isolated fragments." On 3rd October 1960, Nehru told the UN General Assembly, without mincing words, "In order to achieve peace, we have to develop a climate of peace and tolerance, and to avoid speech and action which tend to increase fear and hatred." That was the lesson which our great leader Gandhi taught us. And here I straightaway turn to the philosophy of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, what was Gandhi's philosophy of peace? On 8th May 1937, Gandhi said, "There is no way to peace. Peace is the way." In a most illuminating letter to a well-known American magazine, Cosmopolitan, published from New York, Gandhi crystallized his philosophy of peace. Not to believe in the possibility of permanent peace is to disbelieve in the godliness of human nature. Peace is unattained by part performance of conditions, even as a chemical combination is impossible without complete fulfillment of the conditions of attainment thereof. If the recognized leaders of mankind who have control over the engines of destruction were wholly to renounce their use with full knowledge of its implications,
Bosji,
permanent peace
I
can
would
be
like
obtained.
that copy to be distributed among people.
Yeah.
And please give it for a copy.
Okay.
But please, time is very limited.
So I will only end by bringing in the prayer of Mother Teresa, the Venerable Apostle of Peace and Nobel laureate, Mother Teresa began a Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech on 11 September 1979 with the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. I am highly emboldened to conclude my address with the first portion of that prayer. Lord, make a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, and where there are shadows, I may bring light, and where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So, of course. No, everyone quickly, all of us can talk on the subject.
Now that the bomb has been invented by the scientists, we are crying foul today. Point is that the doctors take a Hippocratic oath that they are going to do ethical medical work. Now, why don't so many Nobel Peace Committee people are here? Why don't you take an oath from the scientists who will not get a Nobel Peace Prize in future if there's a possibility of the proliferation of their scientific tools that they invent? This must be done because scientists are going on inventing things which are used for weapons, building weapons of mass destruction. It's very important we do it, nip it in the bud.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to
Madam, it's a difficult thought that you're proposing because if I know anything about human nature is that we have never ever stepped away from innovation, and that's one of the great things about humans. We're great innovators, and a lot of the technologies that can be used for great destruction and ill are also technologies that can be used for good. Therefore, I don't see any such declarations being forthcoming. That being said, I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment.
I would also like to comment because a lot of issues have been raised by the speakers, whether it's Upadhyayji's comments on alternative development model, or Professor Harang's thoughts on nuclear proliferation, or Manish Tiwariji's talk about, he mentioned Facebook as an example, social media, how it can be a power of good, but is also being used for the negative purposes, and also on development. I think the reason why we have all these problems and the vacuum that we truly have is a vacuum of leadership, because the solution to what we are lacking in today's world is true leadership on all these issues, whether it's proper development or peace or non-proliferation, or even using technology for good and not just for bad things. And that vacuum, I think, has to be filled and is being filled partly by India, partly with the G20 leadership, but also by other countries. So leadership, true leadership, I think, is the solution to a lot of the issues that we are discussing here.
Thank you very much. Here I would like to bring a very interesting point. One of my American friends asked me, I understand that you work with Japan for development and a lot of things you say are correct. Why Norway? So today's topic is the answer to that question. That Japan stood as a symbol of development, and Norway stands the symbol of peace. And without peace and development brought together, nothing will happen new in this world. This is why, naturally, I had this affinity to work with Norway and Japan, and I think this cycle is completed. Thank you very much, Dr. Tohe and Himanshu, Dr. Harang. So I further ask, how about Bharat? Bharat, you're sitting there, you've been working so diligently. Please, mic to Bharat, please. Bharat is a known personality in UAE and GCC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard all the sessions, and my view is they are evolving thoughts, but in a way, the entire ecosystem for alternative development model is not yet identified. We did look at some of the war topics, and most of the root causes of the war have been history, and history is ignored. And unless we acknowledge, accept, and then decide to move on, the wars will keep happening. Whether it is, just to clarify, my outlook is not India focused. I work globally. So I'm not just referring to India, I'm referring to Middle East, I'm referring to Europe, I'm also referring to India as part of it. But history has been the root cause for all wars. And alternative development model has to look at how we can acknowledge and accept history and reconcile with it. Because if we try to fix it, the wars will keep happening. The same applies to weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear non-proliferation is good. It's a step in the right direction, but there can be alternative weapons. Just like alternative development, there will be alternative weapons. There will be biological warfare. There can be, those weapons can destroy the world even faster than what happened in COVID. So nuclear non-proliferation is good, but that's not enough. So either we look at war, the weapons, and the history, which are the root causes, and address those, and then look at development on how development can become more sustainable. We looked at sustainable development models. We are looking at different development methods. But there is a fear, or there is a fear in my mind, that we are doing more of the same. We might fall into the trap of doing more of the same. And how do we avoid doing more of the same?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tiwari ji, I have a question for you. Alternative development model talks about alternative to every system, because the larger systems are made out of subsystems. And the parliamentary system and the political system and governance in the world is also part of those systems. As a parliamentarian, I would like to know your view. Does a parliamentarian system or the governance system in India needs an alternative? Long term or short term?
Well, the one thing that India definitely requires is much more of democracy than what we currently have. So therefore, I think that's one thing, if we don't tinker with, we would be really happy off. And the reason why I say that with a profound sense of responsibility is because ultimately democracy, in whatever manifestation that you conceive it, is really a participatory and an empowerment model. Of course, the Chinese also like to call the system that they have democratic, but that's not the kind of democracy that I'm talking about here. Yes, there is definitely room for improvement. And unfortunately, what we've really done in the past 75 years, at least in the context of India, is that you have constricted and you've restricted democratic spaces. Rather than broad-basing the democratic experiment, you've really tried to sort of whittle it down in the name of a strong executive. And given the diversity of India, and given its sheer complexities, if India has to really prosper, thrive, punch to its weight, grow to its true potential, it can only happen if its participatory democracy is allowed to bloom to its fullest. India, by temperament, by its very construction, is not given to a very strong central impulse. Yes, we've had in the past 75 years of our democratic march, or our march as a country, extremely strong governments at the center. But at some point in time, when history would be written, maybe 500 years down the line, this really would be a flash in the pan. And if there is one fundamental restructuring that needs to be done in India's case, is actually to try and rein in this very strong, strong center impulse, because it really does not work when it comes to the development of the periphery.
Yes. One more sub-question of this is, today we have electoral system of representation. That means a parliamentarian is representing, say, 4 million people, or 2 million people, or 3 million people. But after the election, it's a very rare case where some parliamentarian who's very good may find out a way, but it's a rare case that people have any participation into influencing the representatives' move in the parliament. Whereas in many other countries, which are smaller in nature, this system exists, and it gives a lot of good results also. Do you think India can ever bring a reform where parliamentary, the interaction between parliamentarians and the people who voted after the elections continues?
Well, Vaibhav, I think you ask a very, very important question. It's a question which goes to the very heart of any democratic experiment, and I'm glad that you asked it. You see, the first thing that you need to do is actually restore democracy in your institutions of democracy. And when I say that, I mean you need to actually repeal the 10th schedule or the anti-defection law. Because you have a very strange situation that while people may elect you, it is the parties which run you. So therefore, any elected legislator cannot exercise either his common sense or, for that matter, his conscience, or even put the interests of his constituency or constituents first, if there's a collision between their interests and the interests of the party, which really controls his very existence in that house. So, therefore, the first thing that you really need to do is, because in the name of trying to curb the menace of defection, you've really thrown out the baby with the bathwater. So there's a serious need to relook at the anti-defection law, because it's really sucked democracy out of your democratic institutions. Number two, how do you really have an interactive relationship between an elected representative who represents 2 million voters or 4 million people in the truest sense of the word? For example, because at the end of the day, if you have one person overloaded without any institutional support to try and sort of factor in the concerns of his constituents, which many of us try and do, but more anecdotally rather than institutionally, is something that we really need to seriously think about. Because obviously the answer doesn't lie in increasing the size of parliament. Already at 542 it is unwieldy. Right? So therefore, if you try and increase it to 1,000, you'll have a circus much more than what really happens today. So under those circumstances, I think you ask a very relevant question, and this is something which bothers us also, that the positions that we take as elected legislators are those positions really reflective of the concerns of our constituents? Maybe every issue will not concern everybody.
That was exactly my question, you know. Thank you very much. Now I have a question for Ambassador Fabio and Ambassador Gurjeet Singh. Combined question, one by one, you can answer this, if possible. The similar question, do you think in a current world, we need to reform bureaucracy as well?
Thank you, Chair, for that question, which is very, very simple and at the same time very, very difficult. You have phrased it in a very simple way, but the answer may not be that simple. Let me put it this way. You know, reform cannot come from above, especially in the case of bureaucracy. You may have new legislation, you may have new rules of conduct and all that. It doesn't help. Reform has to come from within. As Mahatma Gandhi said, you have to be the change that you want to see. And for that, what is required is, we need a combination of good character and competence. And I have been sort of conducting mock interviews for the civil service aspirants. And I'm sorry to say that, some of them have come just looking for a job. Good many of them don't read the newspapers, or they have started reading the newspapers after they got past the written. And I tell them, listen, if you are not interested in what is happening in India, if you are not interested in what is happening to Indians, then don't expect us to recruit you because you just want a job. So I think there has to be a change of attitude. We need more character. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador.
The simple answer is yes, of course it needs reform. But the difficult answer is how to reform. And that is always, the process is always more difficult. But let's be honest, our country has changed. So from the ICS to the IAS to the present state of bureaucracy, it reflects your education system, and the bulk of your recruitment comes from a democratized society which has had larger access to education than in the past. So today, most of the applicants are tier 2 city people who join, they are from there. But this is not that the tier 1 city people didn't, it's just that more opportunities in the private sector or mobility overseas has opened up, so people are going there. So there is a larger movement up, but as Ambassador Fabian says, that passion for nation building is not being imparted by our education system and therefore does not reflect in the quality of the staff. So what will you reform? Their minds.
Yes.
You start with the education system,
yes,
and you will get the right people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see more hands there. Guruji, please. Dr. Safdar, yes, please, to him. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. One question I would like to raise, possibly discussing that in our own free time would lead to the right answers. We all know number 1 is a hero, but number 2, number 3, number 4, number 1,000 are the zeros in any social sector? Certainly not. But in the current electoral representation of democratic countries all over the world, all the people from number 2 to 1,000 are zeros. So can there be a rethink on the proportional representation? The constitution, a constituent assembly or a constituent place for a member of parliament, where there are, let's say, 20 candidates who contest in the election, the percentage of votes they garner out of the valid votes would decide the weightage for their oath in decision making. And in today's world, this is eminently possible. If each member of parliament for a particular region is represented by, let's say, 50 people, and these 50 people and 540 do not have to flock into the parliament. There are systems in place, thanks to COVID, where public debate can take place. Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you kindly said, that is a question. I would like to answer myself, and I would like to others to say if they can answer this as well. The answer is yes. What you have just said is exactly what I said in the starting. It is not a zero-sum game. You know, either you are number one or you are zero. That's not. And this is exactly was inbuilt in my question when I asked Member of Parliament, Honorable Member of Parliament Tiwari ji, that is there a need and a space for reform of representation-based politics? You know, so if we can architecturally change things, and it needs debate. You know, we don't have a ready-made solution for it. You know, as Ambassador Gurjeet Singh ji rightly said, we need to debate and come to a point where we can say, where do we start and where do we achieve? So we may know what we want to achieve, but we don't know from where to start and what is the process between start point and to the end point. That's what the debate is required for. So I think there were other hands. Okay, please, Dr. Safdar.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. A.K. Merchant. I've written extensively on this issue of peace, understanding alternative models. I wanted to flag 2 points. A very important issue for world to experience peace would be to curtail extensively national sovereignty. National sovereignty is one of the greatest stumbling blocks in accepting the reality of one planet, one family, one future.
Yes.
The second is, all these years, now it is more than 75 years of the United Nations, and we have not succeeded in limiting the veto power of the permanent members of the Security Council. Because whatever we decide in the UN, all the 193 member states, whatever decision they take, one permanent member of the UNSC completely demolishes that. So these are 2 issues. And then when it comes to India, extensive studies have been carried out on electoral reforms. And yet, as was mentioned, education and character building is still the most important missing link. Indians, I have seen, I'm an Indian, we are still the most indisciplined population in any country. You go to the metro, constantly the announcement is made, please don't stand near the door. And you will see the passengers sticking to the door. What is this? It's not the language, it's said in Hindi and English both. So friends, change is not easy, but I'm really beholden to you, Sir Upadhyay Sir, the Indian Center for Foundation, the International Peace and Understanding Organization, that such a laudable effort has been made. Let's, of course, make a beginning. And the final point is the military-industrial complex. Studies have been carried out that to establish peace on earth is a very inexpensive project. But the military-industrial complex will not allow it. Just 2 days back, the CIPRI book has been out. The biggest arms exporters is United States of America. The biggest arms importer is India. And the second biggest importer is Saudi Arabia. Just see the contrast. So friends, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, it has been a wonderful and enlightening evening. I made extensive notes. It'll be very useful for my next article. I've written about the UN, written about peace, written about various other issues connected to the UN Day. Soon we are going to have the UN World Water Conference, 22nd, 23rd, 24th. Because water is again going to be a very major issue for conflicts. So wars take place for territorial gain, for ideological issues. History is very important, but it's a very complex issue. So thank you very much. But my questions are, is there a way in our search for alternative model to curtail national sovereignty, to limit the veto power? These would be the two most major starting points in our search for alternative models. Thank you very much.
Questions well noted. Thank you very much. Fantastic questions. I'm going to ask Dr. Ashley Tohe to please answer.
Thank you so much. Professor, what a wonderful question. Yes, there is a model. But let me start. This ties into the question of Guruji, which was an excellent question. How can we make democracy more representative? How can we let number 2, 2 and 3 through to 10,000 be heard? There are only two ways to construct order, either by consent or by force. You can force order upon people. We see it in the dictatorships. You can force international order upon weaker nations. It's called hegemony. But there are ways out. The European Union is constructed on the very premise of what you are asking for, the pooling of sovereignty, making sovereignty into a scarce commodity. And in the European area, there have been no wars in the European Union area. Unfortunately, we find ourselves stumped when a great war breaks out on our doorstep and we have to run to the Indians to try to get our chestnuts out of the fire. But it's really the same question as you posed, Guruji. Is there a possible way to get around something that seems to be intractable? Intractable because politicians are concerned that the electorate are easily led astray. We must not give them too much power because some dastardly character will come and lead them up the garden path. I think that much the same way as European integration is one solution to the problem of sovereignty, I think technology is a possible solution to the problem of democracy. We now have the possibility to find out what people actually think about issues. We have everybody, even the poor people have smartphones now. In this country, everybody have a biometric imprint. I think that for India to embrace its fate, it needs to ask itself these kind of questions, exactly the same questions as Vibha Kant here has highlighted. Does India want to be a knockoff, a parallel to a failed developmental model? Does it want to be? Does it just want to style itself to be the mother of democracy, but a poor practitioner of democracy? It's not good enough, is it? I think that India should seriously look into how can we make technology make democracy bloom, to allow not only the number 1,000, but also the poorest person in this country, that his or her voice also be heard on par with the most powerful and rich person on the country. Because after all, I remind you, that is democracy. One man, one woman, one vote. And we should be heard, and we must do better. Thank you so much.
Sudhinji, I have a question for you. You have worked very closely with the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister of India. The time was not very favorable. It was difficult times. And you have seen parties come in, parties going out, governments happening, and you write very well on those subjects. My question to you is, what we can do in our country, or countries like us, to make to give an exit to this zero-sum game and make it new net for political parties. The environment has become such that either you are with me or you are my enemy. Why political parties cannot be on the same platform and talk openly and take back to their decision makers or maybe to their policy makers and say, this is what is the need of the time. Can we discuss policy and we can design it? So I want your views on what is the status today and how we can rectify this situation.
Dhanyawad Vibhoji. Actually, a part of the answer to your question has already come from two distinguished speakers here. First by Manish ji, who said that democracy has to begin with democratic institutions. And probably he meant, he did not use the word, but probably he meant democracy within the parties. And our friend from abroad, he really hit the nail on the head by saying, mother of democracy, true, but not a very good practitioner of democracy. It really sums up what is happening. And we need to pay a lot of attention to what the world is talking about the state of democracy in India, friends. There was also one very perceptive point made by Manish ji, that during the COVID crisis, something extraordinary happened. And that is, each village sort of became an autonomous republic. You know, that's a description you gave. And so, crisis forced us to go into a self-help mode. And we did very well. It's not so much the government, but it is the communities, and it's the local communities that helped each other. But why have we not taken that lesson forward in reforming democracy, reforming democratic processes and democratic institutions? And why have we again fallen back into a democracy which is again tu mai mai? Tu mai mai is all the time verbal contestation of each other. That's not democracy. Look at what's happening in Parliament. If Parliament is the temple of democracy as our forefathers had described, what's happening in this temple? So, democracy at the very least requires dialogue, and dialogue with respect for each other. You may belong to a party that is in the minority, even a very small party, but you must respect. Vibhoji, you mentioned the name of Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. You know, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, when he entered Parliament in 1957 for the first time, there were only 5 members of his party, the Jan Sangh. So, of course, he was a backbencher, but our first Prime Minister, Nehru, would listen very attentively to what Vajpayee ji spoke. And very often, he went up to him and congratulated him. He didn't have to. After all, he was a member of a very microscopic party. Now, that is true democracy. So we must listen to every share of opinion and build consensus. So, when we say mother of democracy, a panchayat culture, what was it? It was listening to each other and evolving consensus. So, if we have to reform democracy, apart from institutions, these old processes of consensus building have to be revived at the local level, national level, and also at the global level. Most important, global level. And therefore, this whole system of veto, it is so outdated, it must be done away with. United Nations must truly become democratic. And of course, we say that now we are the most populous nation in the world. We have overtaken China. And we don't have a place on the UNSC permanent membership. Of course, we have a very legitimate claim. But why only India? Why shouldn't small nations have a voice? So, big or small, rich or poor, all must have a voice that is heard, that is respected, and therefore let's begin this conversation on reforming democracy at the local level and also at the global level.
Thank you very much. Now it is coming to conclusion. I will come to you, say another 5 minutes. I want Mahesh and Nitin to be ready, and they can come here to the dais side and be ready with your presentations, which are very important to see the practical side of what we are talking. Himanshu, I will come to you. I just wanted to say one thing. Like in our parliament, इसको हिंदी में हम लोग ध्वनि मत कहते हैं. I want all the present people to please agree or disagree with the 6 points I'm making towards India's thought process on a possible peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia. Possible, but we don't know. We have no authority to impose this on anyone, but we think this is what can work, 1. Immediate declaration of ceasefire by both sides. Second, an acceptance on all sides that Putin and Zelensky will remain in the jobs, because that's the biggest fear of not accepting anything. Third, the regions occupied by Russia, where Russian-speaking people affirm their allegiance to Russia in recent held referendums, will for now be administered by Russia. And that pending final resolution, these regions will be called exactly what POK is, Russian-occupied Ukraine. Russia must come to terms with the eastward expansion of NATO. Finally, a UN peacekeeping force comprising forces from countries that abstain in US Security Council voting will monitor the ceasefire line between Ukraine and ROU, not Russia, ROU. And this is not the best outcome for any side, but it is in the nature of such conflict that whatever the final outcome is, all will never be happy and satisfied. The illusion that West can defeat Russia and China or China, or that China and Russia can defeat West, is what it is. It is an illusion. An illusion, at any rate, neither outcome would be in the interest of the rest of the world and the humanity. So I welcome Dhwanimat. Do you agree with this or disagree? By amount of sound, we will understand whether there's an agreement to this or not. Please, your tables are there. I will circulate this copy of this to everyone, to citizens of India, and hopefully it reaches to our Honorable Prime Minister also. And this is citizens' voice. We are not an authority on government, but our voice is very important, I believe. Before I go to Himanshu, I would like to say one more thing, that one more initiative which India Center Foundation has taken and working on it, because of COVID, we were not able to do it. In the economic world and non-economic world, one institution in this world has made an immense impact, and that institution is called World Economic Forum. It has done a great job for 35, 40 years, but unfortunately, it represents today the old development model. So, Foundation has created a summit which will, I will not say counter, but which will create a parallel and alternative to Davos in Norway. And Himanshu and me have been working on this for the last 4 years. In 2025, I hereby invite every one of you to be the part of this, whether physically or by content, by ideas, ideologies, whatever you can contribute to make it happen. Everybody who's thinking about alternative and humanity 2.0 definitely will participate. We will make a clarion call to people living in America, Western world, Africa, Asia, other places, So this is just an information on what we are trying to do a big and next, And with that, Himanshu, your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to make a short comment, but I want to go back to the question that you just asked, which was sort of about the polarization of politics that we see all over the world, whether it's in US politics or in my country, or I think in most places, that the mood and the sentiment between parties and politicians is more harsh than what perhaps has been the case earlier. And I'm often reminded of the quote by Voltaire, who said that I may not agree by what you say, but I will fight with my life for your right to say it. The going sentiment is more like, if you don't agree with me, please get out of the room. So we need to have more dialogue, respect each other. We don't need to agree. But there is a polarization of politics all over the world, and somehow we need to find a solution for this.
Thank you, Himanshu. Last question from the madam. Both of you can. Okay, please, very quick one.
Yeah, very briefly.
Both of you. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Harsha Bhargavi. I'm from communication background. So I just wanted to make a point that whatever the goals are there, development goals or whatever we are taking up, communication is the main key role that plays. So we are reaching the last mile, but what kind of content and how we are reaching them. So like if we say about wearing helmet, so whether the behavior impact is there or not. So this is where the impact comes. So that's what during COVID also, there was a interesting things that have worked on a research paper. It's about the Northeast messages, the COVID messages, which were reaching the Northeast people. They were a good mechanism that the local indigenous languages were picked up, immediately translated and given to the public. So the same model, if that can be implemented, I think we can reach the last mile with a proper behavior impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any comments, but I heard words like civilization, I heard words on history. And the whole issue is today we are discussing because history has been absolutely become out of our lives. So I'll just read on the basis of what I read in your concept note that you are saying the alternative development model espouses the non-exploitation of people, resources, and the environment is the center. So I would just like to read two quotations that will give you an idea. Of course, we all are familiar with our famous hymn that we sing every time, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. For the benefit of people who will not know Hindi, I'll just read the translation. May peace radiate there in the whole sky, as well as in the vast ethereal space everywhere. May peace reign all over the earth, in water and in herbs and in trees and in creepers. May peace flow over the whole universe. May peace be the supreme being Brahma. So this is a very eternal hymn of India. And I'd like to just quote two quotations of, very surprisingly, from the West. So the American author Henry Trudeau had said, in the great teachings of the Vedas, there is no touch of sectarianism. It is of all ages, climes, and nationalities, and is the royal road for attainment of the great knowledge. Another American writer had said, that is Emerson, in the great books of India, an empire spoke to us, nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and clime had pondered and thus disposed of the questions that exercise us. My submission is, let us go back to history, let us go back to the ancient wisdom, and we will find solutions to our problems. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Rubina, before you start this, I would like to give a context. What you're going to see today, okay. What are you going to see right now is a case study, the practical side of the alternative development model. The first alternative is being created by our young leader, Nitin Mittal. He's from Pune, runs a successful company, and company has created an alternative, which you will see what alternative it is, in a construction world, and that alternative can apply to many other areas also, which this saves a lot of energy, a lot of carbon, a lot of things, and is a new way of thinking a youngster can think in India. So I was very impressed. So he's invited to explain what he's doing. The second one is Mahesh Shukla, and that's another amazing thing which which we are working together now. He has created a company which can basically empower the unbanked, people who are being refused in India, even given 10,000 rupees has not been given to them because they have been refused on the basis of a system called CIBIL, which is an American system, or system which is not Indian, so he has created a system which can basically bank those who need small support, but it can be spreaded all over India. So, Nitin, thank you.
Thank you, Vibhavji. So that, I think, concludes the discussion that we had. We really want to thank everybody for your insights. So moving on, I would like to introduce Mr. Nitin Mittal, who's the Chairman and Managing Director of K-Nest Manufacturers, India's largest and world's fastest growing aluminium formwork company. Mr. Mittal is a leading voice in the infrastructure development sector and will be sharing his insights on the importance of making infrastructure development cleaner, leaner, and greener from the ADM perspective. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Nitin Mittal.
Good evening all. Thank you Vibhavji for having me here, and it's an honor to be between all the big dignitaries. I'm the Chairman Managing Director for K-Nest. We had started this company in 2014-15. We were a very small company. So I'll just show you what, if you can see that thing, that's the current factory size what we have. We have started with the 5,000 square feet of area. And today we are heading to be the world's largest formwork company. It's a bootstrap company, and the way we are growing, we are making sure that the faster we grow, the safer it is going to be for the forests. Wood cutting is wood which will be protected a lot. So that's our current team size has gone above 850 today, and I think we'll be employing nothing less than 1,500 people in a year. So the impact what we have done is, we have one is sustainable. I think we are all discussing about sustainability, the forest, the environment. So we have directly replaced plywood which was used in construction, and someone just mentioned about water. I think water is the new oil. That can be the next situation where, so people use river sand on the construction, and we don't need that at all. If we use this technology, we can directly paint the buildings, we can save a lot of water and rivers, because that is where it gets depleted the highest. We are making sure that, we hear a lot that construction, the builders, they don't deliver fast. What we have done is, with this technology, we have helped all the developers deliver in 2 years, 3 years, making sure that they're delivering good quality material as well as good quality flats and in time. This not only helps them for faster return on investment, but it also gives them return on time. And the best advantage is that the government makes a lot of money because it's a quick construction and quick development. So basically the vision which we had seen was to make real estate leaner, cleaner and greener, and we are aligned to that, and we are heading to make a big impact and big change. There's a small video which I would like to show.
Sorry, how many streams of income do you have?
Why do we do what we do? The countless tries, the sleepless nights, the endless grind, the planning, the failing, the fighting back, doing it all. Why do we do what we do? The countless tries, the sleepless nights, the endless grind, the planning, the failing, the fighting back, doing it all over again every day for years and generations. We do it for the future, because when we work for the future, we empower it. K-Nest Aluminium Formwork, an endeavor to revolutionize construction, anchored by a state-of-the-art automated factory with an expanse of 5 lakh square feet, housing the finest and most advanced process of manufacturing, which is powered by industry-leading machines and cutting-edge equipment. It's not just what we do, but what we deliver that makes us the leader. Best-in-class products. Everything is calibrated to perfection, from the smallest component to the larger-than-life monolithic structures. All this made accessible with the fastest and most reliable delivery timelines, because we know time makes all the difference. At K-Nest, we nurture the shoulders of the future in an ecosystem of growth and development. We empower the change makers who are building the nation from within with unmatched business practices and collaborative partnerships. Our global footprint continues to grow and create landmarks for a future beyond boundaries, beyond borders. We continue to push our limits and make breakthrough innovations to design the landscape of tomorrow that coexists in harmony with nature. Technology that enables, design that uplifts, innovation that steers. The dream, the passion, the creation, the service, the scale, the change, the legacy. So, why do we do what we do? Because when we work for the future, we empower it. Desh mein bana, desh ka apna. K-Nest Aluminium Formwork, India's largest and the world's fastest growing aluminium formwork company.
Thank you, Pratik.
There's anything quite like this.
So, sir, while it's coming, I wanted to give a definition of peace, which I have learnt on my own. Peace is all about eradicating poverty. Poverty can be very individualistic. It can be, my poverty can be something else. somebody's poverty can be health, somebody's is time. So the day we have understood that individually, so we can get our internal peace. Until the time we don't have internal peace, it's difficult to get external peace. So here, when I had met Vibhav sir, where we were discussing about alternative development model. So we were only discussing that how to take this in a bigger scale, because this requires a lot of capex for developers. And we are thinking of, coming up with more interesting models where we can look for leasing this product. So we are working on that. We have a vision by 2030 we will be protecting, saving at least 1 crore trees, and we are very sure that we are on the track of that. So we will be doing that for sure. We are following the 3 R's, where we are reducing the use of wood, we are reusing aluminium, and we are recycling it. It's a recyclable product in an industrial manner. I think we have the largest clientele in India right now, and we are working with all the top clients where all the high rises are coming, because India has a population of 17% of the world and we have only land area of 3%. So I think we only have one way to go, that's vertical, and that's the most cheapest way of construction. Otherwise, if we cannot even afford to go in the horizontal way. We are purely Atmanirbhar, and it's not only about making India, it's also about making the best in the compared to the entire world. We are exporting to 6 countries, and while I'm speaking to you, I just received a message that some time back that we have secured an order from Saudi Arabia. That's the 7th country. And just to tell you that in 2020, when the entire morale of the country was down, we came up with this film and we made this on our own. My brother Pratyush is there, where he had headed this, and we shot this entire film across 8 states, and this does lift the entire morale of everyone and shows what true India is. So Pratyush, can we have that?
We need state of the art technology. हम इस प्रोजेक्ट में कोई भी समझौता नहीं कर सकते.
Sir, how about Alifoam?
Exactly. Alifoam is the best. Import करना पड़ेगा. थोड़ा पैसा और टाइम ज़्यादा लगेगा, but you know, इंटरनेशनल प्रोडक्ट्स की क्वालिटी बेस्ट होती है. वैसे भी यहाँ मिलता ही क्या है?
नेहा, what are your views?
आप ही डिसाइड कर लीजिए ना.
नेहा?
Sir, मेरा नजरिया थोड़ा सा अलग है. मुझे लगता है कपूर सर ने इस देश को ठीक से समझा नहीं है.
तुझसे ही मैं उपजा, तुझ में ही फना, मैंने देखा जैसे तुझको किसी और ने कहा. इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना, इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना. मेहनत की धूप में तप कर, जहाँ बरकत खेतों में खिलती है, नेकी की सौंधी सौंधी सी खुशबू हर मोड़ पे मिलती है, और मिलती है जहाँ पर कुछ नरमी सख्त हाथों की, अनपढ़ आंखें पढ़ लेती जहाँ बोलियां एहसासों की. पाया जर्रे जर्रे में मैंने तेरा जज्बा. इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना, इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना, इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना, इस मिट्टी का बना मैं, इस मिट्टी का बना. निभा रही है बिन बोले अपना फर्ज कहीं मजहब यही है सिखाता अच्छाई तो कोई कर्ज अब रिवाजों में पुराने पहला नई सोच हो रही हौसलों में यहाँ पे एक कोशिश होती रोज नई देख के मेरा ये हौसला अब पूछे सारी दुनिया इस मिट्टी का बना मैं इस मिट्टी का बना इस मिट्टी का बना मैं इस मिट्टी का बना इस मिट्टी का बना मैं इस मिट्टी का बना इस मिट्टी का बना मैं इस मिट्टी का बना
इस मिट्टी में शिद्दत है, हर कण कण में बरकत है। एक दूसरे का साथ यही इस देश की इबादत है। दुनिया की आंखों में आंखें डाले खड़ा, ये मेरा भारत है। के नेस्ट एलुफॉर्म एंड वर्टिकल्स, देश में बना, देश का अपना। India's largest and world's fastest growing aluminium formwork company.
Thank you all. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much. We are moving forward. I'd like to introduce Mr. Mahesh Shukla, a fintech enthusiast with experience in financial services. He's skilled in credit evaluation, product development, market research, financial modeling, and more. Mahesh will be speaking about the role of financial institutions in promoting peace and stability through supporting economic development. Please join me in welcoming Mahesh Shukla from PayMe.
Thank you, Rubina. So, good evening, everyone. I know most of you would be feeling hungry or maybe thirsty, so I'll not be taking much of your time. But this is something important which I wanted to talk, and thank you, Vibhoji, for giving me this opportunity to put in front of all of you. So before we start, I would like to just walk you through with a small story. So this is my story. I belong to a very rural place, which is almost a village, which is of course now developed, but it was in a very bad shape when I migrated from that village to this city. So I have seen all the phases of finance, and as Vibho sir was rightly highlighted, finance has got a lot of challenge. So despite all the schemes, all the banks, all the financial institutions, all the government schemes which are there, the country is still credit starved, and the schemes are not reaching to the right people. We know that there are very basic parameters which we need in order to underwrite somebody and give them a credit when we talk from the bank's perspective. So bank would want to see that you have an income proof, you have a bureau score, which CIBIL score, which we were talking, and then you have some stable income sources as well before offering credits to you. And some numbers I want to present you. There is 87% in India who look out for credit. They are lacking all those documents and they would get rejected. Out of 391 million people in India who are probably expecting credits, only 15% or lesser would get approved because of these reasons. So that's where we are bringing this alternative financial model. So in alternative finance, we are underwriting these users basis the alternative data which we have available. We are facilitating small credit so that they can build their credit history, they can understand credit, and over a period they can become a bankable. So from underbanked to banked, and from bank to bankable by the banks, this is what we are bringing on the table. We are developing an alternative credit model through which we can underwrite the customers, which we call alternative credit scoring mechanism. And that's what we bring on the alternative side of the financial inclusion. So the vision is that, okay, everybody should get the right credit at the right time with the right rate of interest. So that's what we want to probably facilitate. Bringing lots of financial inclusion will definitely generate a lot of confidence in people, and what we strongly believe that this will definitely bring in lots of peace in India, and we'll think about the world also later. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we've now come to the end of today's program. We really want to thank you for your patience, for being with us. And Vibhavji would like to say something.
There's one person who's in this audience, and he has also done something on alternative. Though he doesn't have any presentation, I would like to introduce that person to you and his work. His name is Gaudasji. Please come in. What he has done is wonderful. You know, using cow dung, he has created a whole economy out of this. And I would like him to speak to everyone. And it is really amazing to see that what can be done from something which we thought is only a waste, you know.
ये विश्व का पहला काऊ डंग गाय के गोबर से बना फ्लावर पॉट, जो आज का विषय है अल्टरनेटिव डेवलपमेंट। तो जो गाय का गोबर व्यर्थ समझा जा रहा है, उससे कैसे रोजगार दिया जाए और वो नेचर के लिए कैसे लाभदायक है। पूरे वर्ल्ड में हम जानते हैं कि ग्रोइंग जो प्लांट्स हैं वो स्मॉल पाउच प्लास्टिक का होता है सब जगह। उसका भी अल्टरनेटिव वैभव जी के कहने पे हमने एक्सपेरिमेंट किया और उस स्मॉल पाउच को रिप्लेस करने के लिए ये स्मॉल काऊ डंग का हमने ये कप डेवलप किया है। इसके अंदर ग्रोइंग प्लांट्स रखेंगे और जब इसको हम कहीं भी लेके जाएंगे, समझ गए होंगे आप कि ये फर्टिलाइजर का काम करेगा।
So just to translate, this is a flower pot made with cow dung, and this is a small cup also made with cow dung. And if you just take it, you can also use it as a fertilizer in your flower pots.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
अभी हमने देखा होगा, ज्यादातर हम भारत के लोग एवरी ईयर जो एक आंकड़ा है, एक डाटा है, 80 लाख लोग डेथ इंडिया में होती है और एक डेड बॉडी पर 2 ट्री कट हो जाता है। कितना पेड़ कट हुआ? 16 मिलियन। उसका अल्टरनेटिव हमने काऊ डंग से ये स्टिक डेवलप किया है और भारत सरकार को और राज्य सरकारों को, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को हमने ये अल्टरनेटिव दिया कि अगर गाय के गोबर से ये इस तरह के बड़े पिलर्स भी बनते हैं, सिंबॉलिक आपको दिखाने के लिए। तो अगर 25% भी अगर हम शमशान घाट पर, क्रिमेशन ग्राउंड्स पर ये वुडन का जो अल्टरनेटिव दिया है, तो इससे भी पेड़ भी बचेंगे और जो गोबर व्यर्थ था उससे गरीब लोग जो बनाते हैं उनको अर्थ मिलेगा। तो वेस्ट टू वेल्थ की ओर हम बढ़ रहे हैं, ये एक अल्टरनेटिव। और हम सब जानते हैं कि गाय के गोबर में 16 एलिमेंट्स इंटरनेशनल लेवल पर जो इस पर रिसर्च हुआ, ब्राजील, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, न्यूजीलैंड, 1930 में वो 5 टाइप की अलग अलग नस्ल की गाय इंडिया से लेकर गए थे। तो उसके ऊपर उन्होंने साइंटिफिक 2000 में रिसर्च किया हमारे साथ और 16 जो 16 एलिमेंट्स हैं वो नेचर के लिए यूजफुल हैं, ऐसा उसके अंदर डाटा आया।
Great. So this is an alternative for using wood during cremation, also made with cow dung. Thank you.
और जैसा कुलकर्णी जी ने और दूसरे वक्ताओं ने भी, स्पीकर्स ने नाम लिया था कि गांधी का देश, गांधी की सोच, और दूसरा नाम क्या लिया था? महात्मा बुद्ध। तो ये काउ डंग से हमने लोकेट एक महात्मा बुद्ध का स्मॉल डेवलप किया है। लोग गले में भी धारण करेंगे तो उनके आसपास का जो नेगेटिविटी है ये काउ डंग के अंदर संभावनाएं नहीं है, ये सिद्ध हो चुका है, ये डॉक्यूमेंट्स आ चुका है। और इस तरह के लगभग 400 आइटम्स की हम ट्रेनिंग दे रहे हैं। लोकसभा टीवी में मेरा कार्यक्रम आता है इसके ऊपर। इसका सबसे बड़ा जो लास्ट पॉइंट मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि हमारे घरों में टीवी, ओवन, एलईडी, एलसीडी ऐसे लगभग इंटरनेशनल 35 इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स आइटम्स, किसी के घर में कोई 10, किसी के 25, किसी के 5 आइटम कोई ना कोई यूज होते हैं। उनमें से जो नेगेटिविटी, जो नकारात्मक ऊर्जा है, वो मालूम है हमें क्या है? एक मोटा शब्द उसके लिए हम क्या यूज करते हैं? रेडिएशंस। तो हमारे यहाँ हाइजेनिक तो हो जाता है, पर क्या हेल्दी हो रहा है? तो यदि हम काउ डंग का कोई प्रोडक्ट अपने घर पर, जैसे अभी मेरे से लोकसभा स्पीकर साहब ने, ओम बिरला जी ने इतनी बड़ी एक काउ डंग की हमने घड़ी बनाई थी, वॉच, तो वो लेकर गए। तो उनकी मिसेस का फोन आया मुझे कि भैया एक और चाहिए साहब, तो वो पार्लियामेंट में ले गए। तो यदि हमारे घर में कोई भी काउ डंग का कोई एक प्रोडक्ट लगा होगा तो वहां से रेडिएशन फ्री एरिया होगा। तो ये इस तरह का एक अभियान वैभवकांत जी के आग्रह पर हमने किया है। और महाराष्ट्र और आंध्रा में जो गणेश उत्सव होते हैं वो हमने गणेश काउ डंग के डेवलप किए हैं। और वो अब जल विसर्जन नहीं, भूमि विसर्जन का अभियान चलेगा और धरती उर्वरक बनेगी। इतना कहकर बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you very much. So that's obviously a sustainable way of approaching things. So we've now come to the end of today's program. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much for being here. And before we adjourn for the evening, we would like to invite you for the dinner reception, where we can continue our discussions in a more relaxed and informal setting. The dinner is outside on your left-hand side on the lawn. Thank you. On the Rose Garden. Thank you so much.